welcome back to Infamous Indie. I'm your host, That Dead Girl, and if this is your first time joining me, I basically sit down and I share with you a true crime story from my home state of Indiana. Also, to my returning viewers, thank you for bearing with me during my month-long hiatus. August was a very busy month for me personally. I went on vacation. Work has been insane, so I definitely needed to take the month of August just to kind of have some time for myself and to kind of just navigate life in general. The good thing about that is I actually had a lot of time during the month of August to sit down and research and do a lot of writing. And I have a lot of great new content and lots of new stories to share with you all. So, as you know, in the past, I've done a lot of videos about serial killers, unsolved murders, haunted locations, just basically a plethora of different things. So, I realized that I hadn't really done any videos focusing on a rampage killer. So, basically, a rampage killer is someone who kills, more than one person at a location. It could be multiple locations, but typically it's always in a public setting. The killings happen very quickly, and there's no point where they stop or have a cool down period. So basically, they come in, they kill, that's the end of it. So a simple Google search actually led me to an article from the Indianapolis Star mentioning the name Judy Kirby. So on March 25th, the year 2000, Judy Kirby leaves her home on the south side of Indianapolis in a 1989 Pontiac Firebird. She had her nephew with her. His name was Jeremy Young, and this day also just so happened to be his 10th birthday. Jeremy was actually the child of Judy's sister, Linda Walker, but she kind of took care of Jeremy and raised him as her own. And actually, she had just recently obtained full custody of Jeremy. It was a very typical day, very typical car ride. The two were actually just on their way to Judy's sister Jeanette's house to pick up three of her children, Jordan, Jacob, and Joni. They arrived at Jeanette's house around noon that day, and as you do in the Midwest, when you go to a family member's house, you end up, visiting for just a little bit before you actually, make your way to leave. So they're visiting with one another, kind of hanging out, playing with the kids and whatnot. And Jeanette and her kids and Jeremy end up leaving around 2 p.m. And as I mentioned before, this day just so happened to be Jeremy's 10th birthday. So the actual plan was for Judy to take all the kids in her vehicle and her sister Jeanette would follow behind. And the plan was to go to the Toys R Us in Greenwood to purchase some birthday gifts for Jeremy. So they all pile into their respective cars. They start driving, and at the beginning of the drive, at the beginning of the trip, everything was going as planned. But at some point during the drive, Jeanette actually loses sight of Judy's car. Jeanette said that Judy had actually stopped her car in the middle of traffic on Southport Road. So she kind of passed on by her and went to turn around. And by the time she came back, Judy, the kids, and her car were all gone, nowhere to be found. And this is just the first of many strange occurrences that would happen on this day that would ultimately lead up to 7 people losing their lives at the hands of Judy Kirby. So at this point, obviously, Jeanette is very worried. Judy has just up and disappeared in her car with her children and her nephew Jeremy. It's not even clear whether or not they actually ever made it to the Toys R Us in Greenwood, which was their original destination. Around 3 p.m., a man working in his yard on Ralston Road actually spots Judy Kirby. She basically pulled up and parked in front of his house, and then she proceeded to stare at him for an uncomfortable period of time. Like, just staring blankly at him, didn't speak, was basically just emotionless. He ended up telling his wife about it, and also another neighbor, but he didn't find it, I guess disturbing enough to actually call the police or make any type of report. So only about 30 minutes after this incident with the man on Ralston Road, Judy is spotted again, this time by two women near Thompson Road. And again, Judy's car is stopped in the middle of traffic. And if you've ever driven on or been around that area of Thompson Road, it's actually a very, very busy street. So these two women, they approach Judy's vehicle, just to kind of see if she's having car trouble, just to check and see if she's okay or if she needs help. Judy explains to them that she needs to use a phone. It's an emergency. She needs to get in contact with her sister immediately. One of the women hands Judy a cell phone, and to her surprise, Judy actually takes the phone and drives away. Now, these two women are basically like, what the fuck? We were trying to help you and you drive off with our phone. So one of the women decides that she's going to go to like a nearby home and use a phone there to call the police and report, her property being stolen. Just as the two women decide to do this, I'm going to say it was probably around 5 minutes after the fact, Judy returns, hands them the cell phone, apologizes, and then speeds off. Now, I do want you to keep in mind that during all these little weird encounters, Judy Kirby has 4 children in the car with her, who I'm sure at this point are kind of sensing that something is just not right. I can imagine these kids are pretty confused and probably really scared, to be honest with you. So from the weird incident with the ladies and the cell phone, Judy and the kids actually end up driving off towards Kentucky Avenue. So around 4 p.m., she would actually show up at Valley Brook Mobile Home Park. So they go to the mobile home park, and Judy actually takes the kids out of the car, and she sees, the trailer park's clubhouse in the distance. So she decides it's a good idea to take these 4 children into this clubhouse. So they come inside, and she can see that there's a baby shower happening. So obviously, Judy and these 4 children were not, invited to said baby shower, and people are kind of looking at her like, who the hell are you? What are you doing here? So some of the guests begin to approach Judy, kind of asking her who she is or who she's there with. And she simply stares at them blankly and says, "I need help." So obviously the attendees at the baby shower are a little off put by this. It's, kind of weird. They don't know this woman or these 4 kids. So they're kind of asking Judy, well, what do you need help with? How can we help you? Judy then proceeds to tell them simply that she needs a birthday party. So, everybody's a little confused, but then one of the guests happened to remember, oh, hey, wait, on the other side of the clubhouse, there's actually a birthday party going on right now. So, thinking that Judy's referring to this other party happening, they give her directions to that location and then just send her on her way. So, from the awkward baby shower situation, Judy would end up driving another 21 miles, and she would end up around the Martinsville area. Around, I'd say 4:45 p.m. is what I believe I read. Judy and all 4 kids actually enter a Speedway gas station nearby. Judy would go on to purchase $3 in gas and a candy bar for each of the children. The gas station attendant would later say that Judy could not operate the gas pump herself, and that he had to physically come outside and pump the gas for her. He also stated that Judy just sat at the pump for a very long amount of time after they'd made their purchases, and she kind of just had a vacant look on her face as if she was contemplating something or thinking about something very serious. So just from these few little random incidents that have happened throughout this day so far, something tells me that Judy Kirby has had some type of mental break, possibly. The vacant stares, the not being able to execute, common tasks like pumping gas or things like that. Just driving erratically, exhibiting all this erratic behavior. Something is definitely going on with Judy Kirby, and something is definitely seriously wrong. Around 4:55 p.m., witnesses begin reporting seeing a white car driving in the wrong direction of the southbound lane on Interstate 67. And you guessed it, that white car that people were reporting seeing was definitely Judy Kirby's 1989 Pontiac Firebird. Judy's car was traveling at very high speeds, varying between 55 to 100 miles per hour. One witness even reported seeing a small boy in the passenger seat who looked as if he was sitting in the floorboard on his knees with his hands outstretched, gripping the dashboard as if he was clinging on for dear life. And as for the driver, the man simply said that all he could see was nothing but blonde hair blowing in the breeze. Countless witnesses stated that Judy Kirby made no attempt to stop or turn around during this time. She proceeded to run at least 9 vehicles off the highway, and you can just imagine the chaos. Drivers are scattering everywhere, trying to avoid hitting Judy Kirby's car head on. So Judy drives along like this for about 2 miles. Finally, she actually clips the tail end of another vehicle, sending her head on into the minivan of 40-year-old Thomas Reel of Martinsville. The impact, of these two vehicles at those speeds on a divided highway, like, the results were absolutely horrific. Emergency workers would later go on to say that they had nightmares, about this scene. Some of them even said that it was something that they'll never forget as long as they live. All 3 of Judy Kirby's children were killed on impact. 5-year-old Jacob, 9-year-old Joni, and 12-year-old Jordan. Her 10-year-old nephew, Jeremy Young, also perished upon impact as well. The minivan that Judy Kirby hit, the driver, Thomas Reel, died, as well as his 14-year-old daughter, Jessica, and his 13-year-old son, Bradley. Bradley's friend, Richard Miller, actually was in the van with them that day as they were all returning from a church function, and surprisingly, he would go on to survive the crash. Richard was severely injured, suffering permanent impairment to his back and his foot. Judy Kirby was thrown from her vehicle and only suffered a closed head injury and a few orthopedic injuries. But with that being said, Judy would go on to survive. Judy Kirby was later charged with 7 counts of murder, 4 counts of neglect of a dependent resulting in serious bodily injury, and 1 count of aggravated battery. So I have to admit, this story had me feeling kind of sympathetic in the beginning when I first started my research, simply because I felt like Judy Kirby was a struggling single mom, and, maybe she was suffering from postpartum depression or, some other type of untreated mental illness. But as I researched more and more and actually saw, things that were said during the trial, it kind of shed some new light on who Judy Kirby was as a person. So obviously we know about the 4 children who died in the car crash, but as it turns out, Judy Kirby actually had full custody of 11 children, which when I read that, I was like completely taken aback. Like, I had always heard about the 4 children, but had no idea she actually had 11 kids. So that's 5 from one marriage, 5 from another relationship, and then her adopted nephew. So that in itself has to be a lot of weight on someone's shoulders, especially seeing as how Judy Kirby was divorced at the time and, didn't have any help really in raising these 11 children. And what's even crazier is that 5 months before the accident, Judy Kirby had actually given birth, which kind of made me lean more towards the, postpartum depression thing. Judy's ex-husband's testimony actually played a huge role in this trial. You see, he claimed that He felt Judy crashed the car intentionally in an attempt to kill herself to avoid their upcoming custody hearing. He claimed that Judy could never accept the fact that they had divorced, that she basically still wanted to be with him. The ex husband actually brought forth allegations that Judy was heavily involved in drug use and drug trafficking. So, with her knowing that he held this information, she was apparently scared that he would bring this forth in court and she would lose custody of her children and possibly even go to jail. And Mr. Kirby was very adamant in his testimony, and he was even quoted as saying, "I know her family will not agree with me when I say this, but I feel like what she did was purely intentional. She meant to do this." And there were several other people who also testified to Judy's involvement with drugs. They talked about in the months leading up to the accident, all of these weird, erratic, odd behaviors that Judy had been exhibiting. It said that Judy would wear disguises when she had to go out in public. She had also taken some serious security measures, placing cameras in trees outside of her home. She also claimed that there were several people watching her and following her. There were also a lot of rumors floating around during this time about Judy having some sort of involvement in an elaborate interstate drug trafficking ring. Now, in my research, I didn't really find a lot of evidence that would support this theory, but honestly, you have family members and people who were married to her and all these witnesses coming forward about the drug use, at least. So we definitely know at this point in her life, Judy had some type of involvement in drugs. Judy's mother and sister would also go on to take the stand during this trial and, kind of shed some light on the state of Judy's mental health during this time in her life. About 2 weeks prior to the car crash, Judy Kirby had actually been involuntarily admitted to St. Francis Hospital, suffering from depression and psychosis. And Judy was treated for about 3 days and prescribed Risperdal, which is an antipsychotic drug often given to people with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and things like that. And, after her 3-day stay, the doctors found that she was no longer a harm to herself or others, so they released her. The reasoning behind her involuntary, commitment was the fact that she had told 2 of her older children that she had planned to kill herself, take her own life. Judy's sister Kathy would go on to say that, you could just look at Judy and she would burst into tears for seemingly no reason at all. Herself and the rest of their family basically had Judy on some type of suicide watch where a family member was watching her day and night at all times. So the more we talk about it, the more it does seem that Judy was actually crying out for help, and it's really unfortunate that she chose to make the decision that she made. The defense maintained that the reason why Judy Kirby decided to crash her car on this day is because she suffered from a condition called hyperthyroidism, which they claim caused her to have psychosis and, paranoid delusions. They also contended that poor design of the highway ramp, poor medical treatment for Judy's illnesses, and her hyperthyroidism itself all played a part in Judy's decision to drive the wrong way on the interstate, crashing her car and killing 7 people. I kind of feel like, their arguments are very invalid, to say the least. I don't think that hyperthyroidism can cause psychosis and paranoid delusions. And I actually felt so strongly about this that I did a little bit of research and looked it up. And what I found was that psychosis is a very, very rare occurrence in, patients that have hyperthyroidism. It only occurs in about 1% of people who have this condition. And typically, the people that it occurs in already have some type of mental health issue or mental health in their background. Sigh. And the argument about, the poorly designed highway, I might have to look at my paper to be able to read all of this off, but basically, Judy Kirby passed 6 signs that said wrong way, 10 do not enter signs, 1 emergency lane to pull over in, and a total of 6 exits. You're not going to tell me you didn't see any of those signs. You never took the opportunity or the time, nor did you want to pull over and stop what you were doing. Also, a forensic investigation that was done on Judy Kirby's car actually indicated that during the time of impact, Judy's brake lights weren't on, meaning she made absolutely no attempt to stop her vehicle. So, looking at all the facts and seeing everything in black and white for what it is, yes, Judy Kirby's story is sad, but I truly believe she crashed this car intentionally. May 10th, 2001, after a 12-day trial in which 114 eyewitnesses were brought in to testify, the verdict on Judy Kirby was finally in. Judy Kirby would go on to be found guilty on all counts, and if you recall, that's 7 counts of murder, 4 counts of child neglect resulting in serious bodily injury, and 1 count of aggravated battery. She would be sentenced to 215 years in Indiana Women's Prison. So in the end of this story, I kind of feel, honestly, like it's left open for interpretation. Was Judy trying to kill herself and her children to avoid, facing an upcoming custody hearing and the truth coming out about her involvement with drugs? Was she, in fact, being followed, being watched? Was she in fear for her life because of her involvement with, these drugs? Was Judy Kirby just a woman who unfortunately was suffering with untreated mental health issues? And, maybe it was a combination of all of these things going on and it just became too much for her and she finally snapped. Whatever the case may be, honestly, we will never know. In all of my research, I have not found one single instance of Judy Kirby ever making a statement, addressing the jury, addressing victims' families, the media, anything like that. No, I'm sorry. No show of remorse. Absolutely nothing. The only direct quote I actually found from Judy Kirby was taken by a police officer almost immediately after the accident, and all Judy Kirby said was that she meant no harm. In present day, on Wilbur Road, just north of Martinsville, when you are driving down State Road 67, you can actually see a sort of monument. There are 7 crosses sitting on the side of the road where the crash occurred in memoriam to the 7 lives that were lost, taken away, at the hands of Judy Kirby. And I did want to add here at the end, just for information's sake, Judy Kirby has made several attempts to lessen her sentence. She even asked for a new trial at one point. She's even brought her case before the U.S. Supreme Court. All motions she's put forth, all appeals, the new trial, the Supreme Court, they've denied everything. So I think it's safe to say that, her fate is sealed. She will not be getting out of prison anytime soon, nor should she, honestly. I myself, I'm a very empathetic, caring person, so I can kind of look at this story and say that it's really unfortunate and it's very sad because it did kind of seem like Judy was screaming out for help, but unfortunately, no one could hear her. And I just want to say that I feel very bad, for the victims' families and especially her own children who have probably had to grow up with this stigma that their mother left behind and carrying on her name. My heart, as always, goes out to the victims and their families. It's truly just a tragic story, and I would not wish that even, on my worst enemy. And that brings us to the end of the Judy Kirby story. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. As always, if you like what I do here at Infamous Indie, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Always feel free to share my content. As I said earlier, September is definitely a new content month, so expect a video every week during the month of September. And actually, this weekend, you guys get 2 videos just because I've been gone for so long. And a later piece that I'm doing is going to be more than one part. So definitely be on the lookout for everything that's happening here at Infamous Indie. And as always, stay spooky, keep it creepy, and watch your back because it's a crazy fucking world out there.